aspect of Highland culture has been recorded and celebrated in music, song, poetry, and dance. And in the 15th and 16th century, Gaelic culture experienced a golden age.
Through the ages, the Highlands and Islands of Scotland have given rise to unique and beautiful forms of cultural expression. But they've also been the scene of extraordinary brutality. Terrible atrocities were committed here during the 16th century as rival clans battled for supremacy. This was a time of fighting and feasting. Great victories were celebrated in extravagant style. It was a high point for Gaelic culture, but one stained with blood.
One clan in particular flourished during this violent chapter in Scotland's history, and their name? MacLeod.
I'm making a personal journey beyond the myths and the tartan to uncover the real history of Scotland's Highland clans. For me, the story of Clan MacLeod starts here at Dunvegan Castle on the Isle of Skye, one of the most enduring symbols of clan power anywhere in the Highlands. Dunvegan has been occupied by the chiefs of Clan MacLeod for over 800 years. Renowned for its great artists as well as its great warriors, in its heyday, Dunvegan was the cultural capital of the Gaelic-speaking world. The chiefs of Clan MacLeod felt that it was their duty to support and to encourage the arts. They surrounded themselves with poets and musicians and storytellers to entertain their guests at lavish feasts for which they became increasingly famous. Dunvegan's association with great banquets and exquisite music goes back to the beginning of the 16th century, when one man turned the MacLeods into a powerful clan that would take on all its rivals. His name was Alistair Crotach. In the year 1500, Alistair Crotach MacLeod became the 8th chief of Clan MacLeod. If Dunvegan on Skye was his capital city, the Isle of Harris on the other side of the Minch was MacLeod's ancestral and spiritual home. Legend has it that he was named Crotach, Gaelic for hunchback, because of a sword cut to his shoulder received while fighting his bitter rivals, the MacDonalds. He was both a great warrior and a champion of Gaelic culture. Today there's evidence of both at St Clement's Church on Harris, a 15th century architectural gem and the final resting place for a man thought by many to be the MacLeod's greatest chief.
Well, a lovely space. I've never been here before, and it's a place I've always wanted to visit. Now, it's very important in the history of Clan MacLeod because for generations the chiefs of Dunvegan and Harris were buried here. Because the one that we want is the most powerful of them all, Alistair Crotach. Now this, I think, must be his tomb because it occupies, well, kind of prime site, if you like, in the church. It's on the south side, beside where the altar would have been, and it's a beautifully ornate piece of carving, wonderful stonework. Down here, we've got an inscription in Latin, Hic Loculus, it's here lies the body of Alexander. Alexander, that's English for the Gaelic Alistair. MacLeod. So there's no doubt that this is the tomb of Alistair Crotach. Over here, a castle that looks remarkably like Dunvegan Castle. And if anything speaks of the power and significance of this great Highland chief, it must be in the emblem of this carved Berlin or West Highland Galley, because no one was really qualified to have a sign or a symbol like that on their grave unless they were really and truly powerful. Here he lies, the great clan chief with his sword on his chest. And looking at this tomb, I get the feeling that Alistair Crotach was more than just a great fighter, more than just a powerful military figure. This magnificent work of art was commissioned by him, and that indicates to me that Alistair Crotach was a man of culture and a man of sophistication.
The wealth to build such a lasting memorial came from Alistair Crotach's ability to control a critical resource: land. The chief of the MacLeods of Dunvegan and Harris controlled some of the richest land in the Highlands, and what he had, he would flaunt. In 1536, Alistair Crotach made a visit to Edinburgh and was really impressed by Holyrood Palace, and especially the banqueting hall with its great ceiling and its magnificent chandeliers. As he was admiring this, a lowland noble came and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "I bet you have nothing like this on Skye." Immediately, Alistair Crotach came back and said, "Oh, we've got something much more impressive, much grander." Now, when the king heard of this boast, he wanted to find out for himself, and the following summer, when he was at Dunvegan, he was taken by a servant up to the top of the hill behind me, where he was met, as the sun went down, by the most spectacular sight he'd ever seen. Because there, at the top of the mountain, stood the MacLeod chief, surrounded by hundreds of his clansmen, each holding a flaming torch. Now, the legend has it that Alistair Crotach greeted his monarch with the words, "Welcome, sire, to my banqueting hall, where the ceiling is the heaven and where the floor is the ocean deep, and where my table is 2,000 feet above the sea." Now, the king was so impressed by this magnificent bout of boasting that the mountains have been known as MacLeod's tables ever since. James IV rewarded Alistair Crotach's loyalty by granting the MacLeods more land on Skye, land that for centuries had belonged to the MacDonalds. The king's generous gift would reignite one of the most violent feuds in clan history.
This now peaceful landscape in the Trotternish district on Skye became a bloody theatre of war in the 16th century as the MacLeods clashed with their bitter rivals, the MacDonalds. In Gaelic, this period is known as Líon na Críoch, the age of feuds and forays.
The river Snizort marks the ancient front line between the two warring clans. I've come here to meet historian Alison Cathcart, who studied the origins of a feud that would last for over 100 years. Alison, what triggered this period of feuding in the Highlands?
James IV really wants to establish his royal authority in the region. He wants to curtail the activity of the MacDonalds, who were really causing a lot of problems at the time. So he tries to sort of bring about a divide and rule policy. You know, if you work with me, I'll reward you. And so he gives some clan chiefs title to lands that they occupy. But that, in doing so, he really creates an awful lot of more problems that he hadn't really foreseen. Alistair Crotach receives a charter from James IV to land, some of which over here in Trotternish on the other side of this river. And that gives him a legal right to lands that he's occupied. But that conflicts with claims of possession that another clan, the MacDonalds, have.
It seems to me as if clan culture is totally bound up with land ownership.
Yeah, it is. There's such a strong connection between clan and the land that they inhabit. You have what's known as duchus in Gaelic, which is a claim of possession, land that your clan, that your ancestors occupied for centuries, and based solely on those rights of occupation, that land is yours. And so it's symbolic, but it's fundamental to the clan system. Land is their most important resource.
And it's worth spilling blood over, presumably.
Absolutely. And they spill lots of it readily.
By attempting to give the clans official ownership of land traditionally held by their rivals, the king provoked feuds all over the Highlands. When Alistair Crotach died in 1547, the MacLeods were totally immersed in a culture of blood. Clan now attacked clan. One of the most notorious incidents took place here at Trumpon Church in 1578. A raiding party of MacDonalds from Uist, just across the water behind me, landed here at the north end of Skye. When they got here, it was a Sunday morning, and the wee church behind me was full of a congregation mostly composed of MacLeods. the MacDonalds barricaded the doors and set fire to the thatch. As the flames and the smoke took hold, the MacLeods inside desperately tried to escape through these small windows, but the MacDonalds outside cut them down. When the MacLeods of Dunvegan arrived in force, they found that the entire congregation had been killed. Enraged, they set off in hot pursuit of the MacDonalds. When the MacLeods caught up with the raiding party, they showed no quarter and the MacDonalds were slaughtered. The MacLeods then dumped the bodies alongside an old stone wall and pushed it over to cover up the dead. It's said that for years afterwards, the bones of the MacDonalds could be seen protruding through the stones. And the entire episode is known in MacLeod legend as the Battle of the Spoiled Dyke. The MacLeods celebrated their victories at great feasts at Dunvegan Castle. And great feasts required plentiful supplies of food and drink, sometimes more than a clan could provide for itself. Warring clans not only wanted the enemy's land, they wanted the crops and livestock which stood on it. And as the feuding between the MacLeods and the MacDonalds intensified, eating and drinking took on even greater significance. I'm having lunch with historian Robert Dodgson to find out how food fights increased the feuding between the Highland clans. So Robert, can you tell me how feasting and food fits into the whole story of clan feuding here in the Western Isles?
If a chief could feast extravagantly, then it was a sign that he had access to the most critical resource of this region, i.e. food.
So it was a kind of flamboyant display?
It's a flamboyant display, yes, and it was an extravagant display. If you lived in a world of scarcity, then the capacity of a chief to feast was a mark of your standing and your status.
How big were these feasts?
They could go on for days.
For days?
Yes, for days.
Until the food ran out?
Yes, or until people were simply exhausted from the constant drink and eating.
What kind of food would have been laid out on the banqueting tables 2 or 3 centuries ago?
We know that the average Highlander couldn't afford to kill his cattle for meat in the way that a clan chief could. And certainly if cattle were gained by feuding, there would be an added appetite.
So it seems that there's more to clan feuding than just killing each other.
Absolutely. Just like today, you can see wars as resource wars, people fighting over key resources like oil. So also can you see clan feuding as, in a sense, a fighting over resources. Food played a key part. You were diminishing the capacity of rival clans to maintain the people whilst enhancing your own ability. If you look at detailed descriptions of clan feuds, they stress the amount of theft going on, theft of cattle in particular. At the same time, they were destroying the standing crops of the townships they were raiding. And so in a sense, you could say they were diminishing the capacity of one clan to engage in feasting whilst enhancing their own.
The clan's culture of raiding and feasting had a deep impact on the ordinary people living in the Highlands. By the beginning of the 17th century, Skye had endured generations of bitter feuding. A contemporary historian wrote that local people had been reduced to such a state they were forced to eat horses, dogs, cats and other filthy beasts. Now, I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it does make the point that life here was pretty rough during the time of feuds and forays. In 1601, Ruairi Moore, the 15th chief of the MacLeods, tried to end the feud not on the battlefield, but in the marriage bed. He offered the hand of his sister to the chief of the MacDonalds on Skye, Donald Gorm, but his plan ended in yet more fighting. George Macpherson is a Shenachie or clan storyteller. He's taking me to Corrin and Creech, where the feud between the MacLeods and the MacDonalds came to a bloody climax. George, when did the feud between the MacLeods and the MacDonalds on Skye come to a head?
Well, it all came to a head in 1601 with a hand fasting.
What is hand fasting?
Well, hand fasting was a contract entered into between two parties. whereby they would remain as man and wife for a year and a day. And if in that time the woman produced an heir, then it would be turned into a marriage.
So this handfasting was designed to end the feud between the MacLeods and the MacDonalds. Was it successful?
No, it wasn't. After the year and a day, Gorm sent Rory Moore's sister back to him. He had discovered that she was blind in one eye, so he sent her back, tied backwards on a one-eyed horse, led by a one-eyed servant with a one-eyed mongrel dog trotting behind.
Well, that's a great insult.
It was a huge insult, and of course it was intended as such to aggravate the situation, and it led eventually to the War of the One-Eyed Woman.
The two clans were now engaged in an all-out battle for supremacy. After a year of intense fighting, the War of the One-Eyed Woman reached a violent finale when the MacLeods and the MacDonalds clashed here in this glen.
After a tremendously bloody fight, there was hundreds killed on each side. The MacLeods had to give way and retreat back to Dunvegan Castle. But so much blood was spilled that the river we can see down here was called Altgerad Bic, the Little Red River.
Although the MacLeods lost the Battle of Corrin and Creech, the War of the One-Eyed Woman ended without a winner. The conflict was so destructive, the king intervened, and after more than 100 years of feuding, the two clans were forced to sign a ceasefire agreement. Corrin na Creech wasn't just the last battle to be fought between the MacLeods and the MacDonalds on Skye, but it was also the last clan battle to be fought anywhere in Scotland. And in true Highland style, what better way to mark the end of a long and bloody feud than by throwing a big party? It's said the festivities at Dunvegan Castle lasted for 3 weeks. Rory Moore saw to it that his former enemies enjoyed the very best of MacLeod hospitality. Food was generously provided, and the drink, well, the drink was consumed on a staggering scale.
Neil MacVourich, one of the MacDonald's legendary bards, noted that there was no stinting of the generous wine which would overcome the hardiest of heroes, and that 20 times drunk were we each day, nor did we rebel against it. But it was the playing of the bagpipes and the pibroch that cemented the clan's newfound friendship.
The MacLeods and the MacDonalds had finally come together in peace, and the terrible cost of their bitter feud was expressed in the haunting music of the pipes. Rory Moore's renowned piper, Donald Moore MacCrimmon, played the MacDonalds into Dunvegan with a pibroch that's still played today by his descendant Callum.
Nice one. That was an excellent piece of music, Callum. Does it have a name?
It's called MacLeod's Controversy. This tune was written by Donald Moore MacCrimmon, more as a reminder of the feuding that had been done, I think, rather than a celebration of it finishing.
Now, you're a MacCrimmon yourself. What's it like playing this piece of music today in the 21st century?
It gives you an insight into, hopefully, you know, what was going through that composer's mind at the time. MacLeod's Controversy, I feel, is quite a sad tune and reflects the bad times that were shared between the MacDonalds and the MacLeods for over 100 years.
The MacLeods had survived the brutality of the age of feuds and forays, but they were about to face a much more insidious attack, one that would have a deep impact on all the Highland clans. In the early 1600s, James VI of Scotland devised a plan to end clan feuding once and for all. He forced clan chiefs to sign a series of acts designed to curb the lifestyle and traditions they'd enjoyed for generations. Now ruler of Scotland, England and Ireland, King James was strapped for cash. He wanted the Highland clans to help fill the royal coffers. In order to do this, he first had to bring the culture of feuding and feasting to an end. Signed in 1609, the Statutes of Iona were the first salvo in a sustained attack on the Highland clans. Under threat of imprisonment, Rorymore MacLeod agreed to this code of conduct that bound him to keep the peace. Above all, the statutes were designed to convert his warriors into farmers and fishermen. An original record of the statutes still exists and is kept at the National Archives of Scotland, where I met historian Alan McInnes.
Alan, what's in the box?
What's in the box? We actually have the famous or infamous Statutes of Iona.
What kind of restrictions are being put in place here?
The general statutes will specify that drink is to be curtailed, there's not to be excessive drinking, cutting the number of weapons and such things. But the other more important point than actually restrictions is that you have this problem of what do you do with fighting men? How do you make them productive? And what the statutes are saying is that these people should be declared redundant, as should be other parasitical poet classes.
Like the bards?
Like the bard, but they didn't contribute to the working of the land. So what these statutes led to, and where there's a much more profound change, is the statutes put emphasis on the productive use of land.
Rather than a culture of display?
Estate management rather than display.
And what did James VI hope to achieve by this?
The Highlands and the West Highlands has been a particularly violent area, and James wishes to curtail this, to curtail the notion of the feuds, the desperate feuding between, for example, the MacLeods and the MacDonalds.
So the king saw the Highland chiefs as being barbarous and uncivilised in some way?
He saw them as being a propensity towards violence, a propensity towards barbarity, a propensity towards excessive drink. And he wanted to control this. We can see here the reference to the shipping of wine. That is to curtail the import of luxuries such as wines and brandies.
Now, it's interesting that he singles out feasting and drinking as part of the problem. In what sense would you say that this was an attack on Gaelic culture?
The state is no longer prepared just to let things go in the peripheries. It wants to keep an eye and keep a check on things. The statute signposts a change in attitude by the state, a state that can now coordinate resources in London, Dublin and Edinburgh to change the world completely for the likes of Rorymore. And so it was a testing time. It became a standard which you could judge chiefs, are they good citizens or are they not? And Rorymore eventually died a good citizen, having been a warlord for most of his life.
The Statutes of Iona marked the beginning of the end for the old clan system. They were followed in 1616 with another set of even tighter restrictions on the Highland clan chiefs. From now on, clan feuds were settled in the courtroom rather than on the battlefield. The pen had become mightier than the sword, but despite the king's attempts to curb the lifestyle of the clan chiefs, Gaelic culture actually flourished, and by the end of the 1600s was experiencing a golden age. Whilst the fighting was curtailed, celebration through music, poetry and song continued. Under the patronage of the MacLeods, there was an explosion of creativity that helped establish a tradition which remains strong to this day. And nowhere is this more evident than on Skye. Singer and musician Mary Ann Kennedy is keenly aware of just how close we came to losing a unique part of our national identity.
Mary Ann, as I understand it, the monarchy in Edinburgh had a deliberate policy of unpicking Gaelic culture. How successful was it?
The Statutes of Iona set about anglicising or de-Gaelicising the Highlands of Scotland by taking away all the elements that contributed to that culture, to that clan system, to the structure that allowed these people and that life to exist. And I suppose in many ways it was successful. It attacked the family system of the clan chiefs, it attacked language, it attacked their ability to control their own individual little worlds. It's a miracle that Gaelic language and culture still exists today. The whole system of patronage of the arts, it wasn't just about creating music and song, it was an assertion of identity. And in doing that, it's a very difficult thing to get rid of. A person will be a person, a people will be a people, and they will find a way of asserting that about themselves. And if you look at Dunvegan, the seat of the MacLeods, that was the last great flourish in many ways of this system of the artists and the clan chiefs and their coexistence. Songs and poetry that stem from that century do come right through to today.
Gaelic culture has always been a celebration of life in the Highlands and Islands, but its role is not always reserved for joyous occasions. Today, the clan piper is lamenting the passing of the 29th MacLeod chief, who now rests here with his ancestors at Kilmuir Church near Dunvegan.
A stone having been raised is now unveiled to perpetuate the memory of John MacLeod of MacLeod.
The title MacLeod of MacLeod has now passed to his son Hugh. Inside the walls of Dunvegan Castle, I wanted to know what the future holds for the 30th chief of Clan MacLeod.
Magnificent room, full of portraits of, I suppose, your ancestors, the clan chiefs MacLeod.
Yes, and this is a painting of my father, who sadly passed away this year.
He looks very much the chief there.
And he was a very powerful personality.
So your father was very aware of his Highland heritage that went right back to the early chiefs who were great patrons of the arts.
Yes, it started by Alistair Crutach, and my father continued that. He was very proud of that. He had two real passions in his life, and the one was, first was music, and the second was Dunvegan. So he did have a very strong passion for the arts, but he also understood that he had a duty to Dunvegan and being chief of Clan MacLeod.
Where do you think the role of clan chief and the concept of clanship fits into the 21st century?
Well, I mean, my father died 5 months ago. It's way too early for me to be able to say how I feel, really. I mean, I'm still kind of trying to find my way and figure out what it is for me to be a clan chief. I have to find my own kind of way of being a focal point for many clansmen and women who find it very comforting when they come back and know that chief of one branch of the Clan MacLeod is still living in the castle of their ancestors.
The MacLeods are no longer the great power they once were. During the 16th and 17th centuries, all the Highland clans underwent massive and permanent change. But the culture they nourished and sustained still endures today. There's no doubt that the MacLeods of Dunvegan and Harris have left us with a rich cultural inheritance. But today, responsibility for this legacy doesn't just lie with the chiefs alone. It's one that belongs to the whole of Scotland.
Panorama on BBC One Scotland now investigates if Britain could be heading for a financial crisis similar to that in the US. Here on BBC Two Scotland, Nigella's next.